One of the best ways to deepen our understanding of music and our playing is to expand the chords we know. A great way to do this is by grabbing new ones from the songs we learn. So today I'm going to share 5 that I've picked up over time from Trey. I'll explain how to play them, where they come from, and how you can apply them to your playing. Hey, Chris here. Welcome to the lesson. Just before we get into the first chord, please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want the free worksheet, there's a link in the description. Be sure to grab that. Let's get into it. For the first chord I want to share with you guys is probably the most commonly used one from Trey. And it's basically a power chord with the major third at the bottom of the voicing. And it shows up in a ton of songs. It's in Bathtub Gin, Back on the Train, Rift, Horn, just to name a handful of songs. He does it a lot. So here is where I'm going to put it. It's going to be a C over E, or I should really call it a C5 over E, and I'll explain now. If I go to the 10th fret of the D string, that's the note C, and I'm going to play a power chord right there. So the reason I would call it a C5 over E is because a power chord, it's technically called a 5 chord because you're playing a root and a 5th. So what we're going to do is put that major third on the 12th fret of the low E string, and there it is. He uses it a ton, like I said, and I'm going to show a couple different ways you can use it in terms of rhythm playing and also lead playing. Before moving on though, I want to also share that this is the major version of it, but if you just move your middle finger 1 fret to the left of what I just showed, then it becomes a C minor chord of sorts. You would call it a C5 over E flat. Really, it's a C minor chord if you play it like that, and a C major chord if you play it like that. In a moment, I'm going to show how you can add some modal tones to it and even get more out of this. But for now, we can just think of a regular major chord or minor. I'm going to stick with major just for these purposes, but you can take it and expand it from there. Now, here is one of the ways this chord can be really useful. Let's say that you're having a chord progression that goes from a C to an F major chord. And let's say that you want to create a feeling of lift, of ascension, with the C major chord leading up to the F. Well, what I'm going to do here is, let's say I play a measure of C like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to move it up 2, 3, 4, and then lead it to an F. Now I put the F up here just because I happen to be there instead of here. I was just closer to this voicing, but you see how from here to here, we can create this feeling of lift, even though we're playing the same chord. Technically, it's still just a C major. And then it gives a really satisfying resolution to the next chord because we're a semitone under it leading up to the root of the new chord. So that's one purpose, is it can create a lifting feeling like that. But what goes up must come down. It also can go the other way. Let's say that you had a chord progression that was like this: 2, 3, 4, A minor, 2, 3, 4. Well, we can use it in this case, instead of doing it as a C over E, what I can do is create a walking tone in between the C chord and the A minor chord right here with this note B. Now, B is the major third of G. And if I plug in that same voicing right here, it creates this sort of walk down chord that leads us into the minor chord. So if I play that from C, it would go something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it can be used to create a feeling of lift or a feeling of falling down, and many other things. We can also add a lot of modal flavor. And so let's go back to the C over E, or the C5 over E up here. The really cool thing about having this power chord living right here is we can use it as a reference point to add a lot of different kind of tones to it. So let's say that we want to make this more of an Ionian, just kind of a major scale type of thing, and maybe we want to throw in a major 7. So it's really easy to see that here. If I just take my pinky finger on the 13th fret of B and just go 1 back, that'll give me the major 7. And that's a really pretty voicing right there as well. And so when I play, I can think to myself, okay, this is a lot like being in the second position of major pentatonic, like that, and maybe you go here, So we've got all that stuff at our fingertips. And if we just throw in that major 7, it's not necessarily implying Ionian directly, because it also could be Lydian, but it just, having that B in there, it just gives it a little bit of a different flavor than we had before. And of course, if there's a B here, there's also one here. So we can... create lines that use that and everything else in there. So I'm just envisioning that chord shape. And there's also, this classic kind of D shape from Caged. If you are familiar with that, you could kind of use that as well. You've got this kind of shape right here. Another way to do it is to create more of a Lydian feel. And now, like I said, use that power chord as a reference point. The note that really brings out the Lydian flavor is a raised fourth. And the raised fourth is just 1 to the left of the 5th. And remember, this is a C5. So there's the C, there's the 5th. Therefore, the raised fourth is here. So if I take the rest of that stuff, either thinking of the chord or thinking of the pentatonic that lives there, if I just add in this note right here, which in this scenario, in this context is an F sharp, it's just 1 back from the 5th though. I have a couple spots where I can throw that note in, so I can just add those tones in to the chord shape or to the pentatonic form, and I can get this really beautiful Lydian sound. And it's really kind of a boxy little zone, and I just find it really fun to play lead stuff out of. And then I'll share one more major mode you can throw in, which is mixed Lydian. And I've got a loop set up, and I'm going to kind of talk you through some of the stuff I might do there. But for mixed Lydian, it's really interesting because not only do we have a flat 7, and again, if we look at this chord shape, look at where your pinky is. Remember how I said earlier the major 7 is here, and the flat 7 is just 1 to the left of that, which is right here. That's a B flat. So we've got a B flat here, and we also have one really easily accessible on the 13th fret of the A string. So having this chord shape plus this note and this note, well, they're the same, gives me more of that mixolydian kind of vibe. So I'll usually combine that kind of stuff. I also like a little bit of chromaticism here. Stuff like that. I just love that. And I'll also, because mixolydian is kind of bluesy, or can tend toward that style, I'll also mix in minor pentatonic because it just works so beautifully. Now, if I'm right here in this zone for this chord, the minor pentatonic I'd be thinking of is second position of C minor pentatonic. So that is starting on the 11th fret, goes like this. And you may want to shift with the index to the 11th fret. So for example, you might go like this, shift up, and then shift back down. That might be a good way to go. But I'm going to put the loop on, and I'll show you how I'm seeing this shape as well as the second position of minor pentatonic. 1, 2, 3, and... Hey, I hope you're enjoying the lesson. We're going to get right back to it in a second. Just wanted to let you know that for the first time ever, I'm offering a monthly subscription option for my online course and community, Elevated Improv. I built it from the ground up specifically for guitarists that love Phish, jammy music, and want to get better at not only their general technique, but improvisation. So if that sounds like you, click the link in the description below and start your free 7-day trial. It's never been easier to join. I'm offering 2 options. With option 1, it's called General Admission. You get full access to the entire curriculum of over 180 lessons and exercises. a free copy of my ebook, as well as members-only Phish content like my classic scroll-through videos and long-form lessons. With option 2, the VIP pass, you get everything that comes with option 1, plus a one-on-one session with me so I can help you assess where you're at and how to achieve all your goals, plus a weekly live session with me where I leave time not only for Q&A so you can get your questions answered, but also I present a lesson on a range of topics from general technique to music theory. So again, if you're a fan of Phish and jamming music and want to take your playing to the next level, click the link below and I'll see you there. Now, back to the lesson. The next chord I'm going to share with you guys is an A minor 6 over C. So it's another inversion or slash chord. And the song that I'm thinking of this from is Harry Hood. And so let me show you what the chord looks like first, and then we'll kind of get into how we can think about it and where it comes from and how to use it. So we're going to put the middle finger on 8th fret of low E, index bars from 7th fret of A to the high E string, pinky goes to 10 of the D string, ring fingers on 9 of G, and it sounds like this. Sort of this mysterious sounding chord. It's really beautiful. And the reason I'm calling it A minor 6 over C is because, and by the way, there's no root to that, so there's actually no A in the chord, but the rest of the band is kind of playing an A minor against that, or Trey's playing this against an A minor, and so I'm thinking of it through the lens of an A minor, and the reason I'm calling it a minor 6 is because it has a C in there, so it's a minor chord, but it also has an F sharp, which is the major 6 of A, and there's also an E in there, which is the 5th. And so if I were to associate that with a mode, I would definitely think of that as like an A Dorian kind of thing. And since I would see and hear that as kind of an A Dorian situation, I can make the inference that that's coming from the key of G major, because G major would be the 1, and then Dorian is always 2, and in this case it would be A Dorian. And we can backtrack and just figure out, oh yeah, that's from the key of G. So over here, I'm thinking of that as a Dorian thing and hearing it that way, but also this is another one, kind of like the example before, where we can also tie it into a pentatonic position, and it just so happens to tie into the second position of A minor pentatonic. So all this stuff I was showing in the last chord for C minor pentatonic second position, you can just move that down to the 8th fret and do the same stuff. So for example, there's your pentatonic position. And like I said before, once you get to the B string, if you prefer to shift up, I totally get that. In fact, if you're going to bend, that might be a good way to go. At any rate, we've got this note right here, which is that F sharp, that kind of Dorian note. It's right here, and it's also right here on the A string. That's a trick. If you know where a note is on the A string, you can go down to the B string to the left 2 frets and match that tone. And of course, the opposite is true. If you know where a note is on the B string, so here's an F sharp, and if I want to find it on the A string and find the octave, I go up 2 frets to the right and climb up to the A string, and I can match it. And, you know, that works for every single tone. You know, that's just a little octave trick. So at any rate, now if we combine our second position of the minor pentatonic with those F sharps, we get... So it's a really cool sound. In just a moment, I'm going to play a loop with an A minor chord and just show you some different ways to go about using this voicing for your lead playing, not just your rhythm playing. But just before I loop over the jam in a second here, I want to make a point, which is that, as usual, even though this looks like a complicated chord and it's kind of a handful to play and all that, at the heart of it, it's very simple. You've got a C octave with an E in the middle right here, and then right here, you've got this, if you think of your triad form for a C, which is the relative major of A minor, and if you just drop this index down, or you could play it like this, that turns it into more of this kind of Dorian feel in the context of an A minor. But that shape is really pretty simple. And then if we bar the index finger, we also add a 9 into there as well. So just a gorgeous sounding chord, but you've got these little mini structures that are living there that are really easy to grab, and those are the kinds of things I might use as kind of like raw material when I'm jamming to create little motifs and, you know, get themes going. 1, 2, 3, and... The next three chords are going to get a little stranger and a little more exotic, a little more tension built into them. So this third chord is going to be an E over F. And the song that I'm thinking of this chord from, although it happens a bunch of times in this song, is from It's Ice. And if you think about the part in It's Ice where Trey's going, that's what I'm talking about. That's the voicing I'm grabbing. I'm just putting it in this particular spot for a reason that I'll explain in a second. To build this chord out, I'm going to come down here to the 3rd fret of the D string, put the index finger there, middle finger on the 4th fret of G. I'm actually going to do the ring finger next. It's just a little easier that way, I think. I'm going to put it on the 4th fret of the high E string, and then pinky finger on the 5th fret of the B string. Of course, it's good to be able to do that all at the same time, but just to kind of build it out from the ground up, that might be a good way to go. And it sounds like this. Now, I'll be the first to admit that's pretty darn tense, and the applications for this one are going to be pretty limited, but I thought it was interesting and worth sharing with you guys anyway. I don't know about you guys, but the feeling I get from that part in It's Ice is very intense. You know, there's this feeling of conflict, and this descending pattern really creates this chaotic feeling. So this chord, you know, it has a real purpose, which is one of tension. I would say it's very tense. Before doing anything else, though, with this chord, I wanted to point something out that, you know, even though this is kind of a unique chord and it's pretty exotic and tense and pretty strange, you could view this as just coming from the major scale, but with a little caveat, maybe a big caveat. As I've mentioned before many times on this channel, I'm a huge advocate for the Barry Harris School of Thought, which, and I'm still trying to figure it all out myself, but from the point of view of the major scale, it has 8 notes instead of 7 notes, and that 8th note that's added in is a sharp 5 into the regular scale. So if we're in the key of C, and if I play the 6th diminished scale, that's what it's called, you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sharp 5, 6, 7, and there's your scale. It's an 8-note scale, which, by the way, rhythmically feels way better. You ever notice with the major scale, it's like, it just rhythmically isn't very satisfying. If I add that note back in, it feels like just a perfect resolution. And I think that's a lot of the function of those old bebop scales, is that extra note gives it a rhythmic resolution that's really powerful. Now, the note that I added in is a G sharp, which I was putting up here. So in the key of C, you already have the note F, that exists in the key. You already have the note B, that's in the key. E is in the key, and now I've added this G sharp. Again, a caveat, because not everybody's going to see it that way. But I don't view this as like this crazy outside chord. It's just living inside of the major scale. And it's, you know, one way to think of it is kind of like a Phrygian style chord, or that's one way you could think of it. Next, what I'm going to do is create a loop using this chord and just kind of show that if you just think of this chord as coming from, in this scenario, the key of C with the 6th diminished scale, just meaning I'm going to add a G sharp, it can play really nice with this, even though it's this almost ugly kind of sound. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, and... Even though in some ways what I just played, it sounds kind of outside or like some kind of exotic scale in some ways, it's really just, I'm thinking C major scale and throwing in an E7 and just including the note F. Really, it's that simple, but it ends up sounding more complicated than it is. But I just thought that one could give you something fun to play around with, even though it probably won't pop up that often, just something kind of cool to have in the toolbox. The next chord I'm going to share with you guys is going to be an F minor major 7th, and I'm thinking of this as coming from Reba, and it's really a beautiful chord that has so much feeling wrapped up in it. So here it is. What I'm going to do is put the pinky finger on the 8th fret of the A string, middle finger on 6 of D, and then I bar the index on the 5th fret of G and B string. And when you put it together, you get this kind of, it's another mysterious sounding chord. And you know what I really think of when I hear this is if you think of like old detective movies and it's in black and white and it's a smoke-filled room or like a smoky alley. Like, I like to associate these chords with a visual because it just helps me remember it and kind of store it away and grab it and use it for an appropriate scenario. So over here, it's just like, you know, you've got a minor triad, so that part's really simple. It's just that we're putting a major 7th on top. And what I mean is if you were thinking of F major and you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that note, E, is the major 7th of F, and we're just putting that on top of the minor triad. So now a couple places you can think of this coming from. It's really an interesting one. Again, I'm looking at things through the lens of the Barry Harris School of Thought. And the cool thing is right here, I can use the same example key that I did for the last chord, which is C major. And if you look at it, F is in the key of C, so that's cool. There's that sharp 5 that I added, which is a G sharp. Now in this case, I'm more inclined to think of it as an A flat, like a flattened 3rd of F. C is in the key of C, so we're good there, and so is E. So it's really, you know, once you include that one note into your range of stuff, you know, from the major scale, it really opens up tons of chord options, and this is one of them. So I just view this kind of chord, this minor major 7th chord, as being potentially in the 4th spot. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can play a minor major 7th chord. Now, of course, it's got to be appropriate for the progression and for the tune. Another place you can place this kind of chord is in the 6th position, but that would be in a different key if I'm doing an F minor major 7. So I would say, well, what is F the 6th of? And a really quick way to do that is to think of your relative major. Just go up 3 frets, and that'll tell you the key that you're really drawing from if you're thinking of F as the 6th. So that would be the key of A flat, and so you could think of this as the 6th of A flat, or the 4th of C major. And yet another way you could think of this is the root of an F melodic minor. And either way, it's really going to sound cool. It just depends on the vibe you're going for and the flavor you want to get out of it. But I want to share another trick here, which is kind of out of left field, but I think it's kind of fun and a little different, which is this. Instead of just thinking of that from the point of view of the root of that chord, which is F, so we're playing an F minor major 7, I wanted to encourage you to try a different thing, which is this. If you have a dominant chord, let's say in E7, which is what I'm about to loop in a second and show you this, if you have a dominant chord, try playing a minor major 7th chord 1 semitone above the root. In other words, plug it in where the flat 9 is or the flat 2. And it's a really interesting way to get this almost like a diminished flavor out of your playing, but just a kind of a sneaky way to do it. So to kind of tee up what I'm going to do here for this loop, I'm going to be playing around with this form I was doing here for this F minor major 7. I'm seeing elements of an E7, the E minor pentatonic scale. All that stuff is going to kind of flow together and create this kind of sound that is almost outside sounding and a little exotic and almost diminished sounding. So we can really get this sneaky diminished sound by way of this voicing that I was sharing with you guys. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, and... For the 5th and final chord I'm going to share today, it's going to be an augmented chord of sorts, and I'm grabbing this one from Gaiuti, and it's another really tense, beautiful chord. It's going to be a G7 sharp 5 over F, so another slash chord where we're kind of inverting things. And here's what the chord looks like and sounds like. We're going to be over here on the 3rd fret of the D string with the index, go ring finger on 4 of G string, 4 of B string with the pinky finger, and middle finger plays the 3rd fret of the high E string. And it's this kind of dreamy sounding chord. You could also wrap your thumb around and have a lower root there. Then it would just be, it wouldn't be over F at that point. It would just be a G7 sharp 5. The 7 is because of the flat 7, that's the F. It's a major chord, it's got a B in it. The raised 5 is a D sharp right there, and then of course you've got your G. Now, a couple places you could think of this chord as coming from, or the most likely places I might think of, are again kind of a Phrygian dominant situation. So in that case, I would be thinking of that as coming from the key of E flat, because I'd kind of work backwards and say, okay, in which key is G the third? Because that's Phrygian. And I would just backtrack and go, kind of like hot cross buns like that. That's the Phrygian spot. You just go back, you land on E flat, and that tells you the key you're coming from. And so that would be the key I would be drawing from for this style of chord. Again, from the Barry Harris School of Thought, of course, because that wouldn't be a dominant chord in traditional music theory. It would be a minor chord. At any rate, that's one way you could think of it, because you've got an F in that key. The B is kind of the added tone. That's the sharp 5, because B flat is the 5th of E flat, the home key. So a raised 5th would be a B natural. And then we've got E flat, that would be in the key, and so a G. So everything's there. But another way you could think of this chord, or kind of draw from a different scale to get this chord, is the 5th mode of melodic minor. So then you would say to yourself, in which key is G the 5th for melodic minor? And that would be C melodic minor. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to loop this chord and just show a couple different ways you can go about this. And actually, before I do play that, I want to also make another connection, which is that because this is a dominant chord, another thing that works really well against a chord like this is mixing in minor pentatonic, but then also targeting the major third. And again, I've been talking a lot on the channel lately about this bend on the minor third, just ever so slightly sharp. You know, so you've got all that kind of stuff. You've got a minor 6 in there, or you could think of that as the augmented 5th. If we're coming from the C melodic minor, you could think of that as like mixo flat 6. Either way, that would be an E flat that you'd be throwing in. So if you take a G shape like this, throw in some minor pentatonic stuff with a major third in there, and then this note here, E flat. So if you combine all those elements together, you already get this really cool sound. And also in this zone, something that works really well is that C melodic minor scale. So think of that just like your C major scale, but with a flattened third. Everything else is the same. If you combine all those elements together, you get this simple G shape. You've got minor pentatonic stuff you can do. You've got that E flat thrown into the mix. You've got C melodic minor stuff you can do. Tons of stuff, or you can go with that Phrygian dominant sound. So what I'm going to do is loop this chord, and I'm going to play around with some different elements that I was just sharing. 1, 2, 3, and... All right, thank you so much for sticking around to this point. I hope you enjoyed that. If you need any clarification on anything, leave any questions you have below. Or if I forgot any chords that you feel like I should have included, leave those below as well. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.